Hello, guys, and this is another edition of Lockdown Movie Reviews. Just insane everything here. I have to say that the last movie I watched, I had to break it up into sections. It's on demand right now. It's called The Searchers. It's an old western that I'm probably going to try and do some filmography on it and send it into the Library of Congress because it is such an in-depth movie. And this movie was made 3.5 hours long without commercials. So whenever you sit down, if you want to see this movie, you really do need to pay a lot of attention. It's based off of an actual real event, an actual real raid at the end of the Civil War. And there is so much controversy still about it. It's an open, unsolved case, really. Mostly because at the very first of it, we get to meet John Wayne coming back home to be with his family. And his family stayed out of the war, even though they had people who were eligible people for the war. They were in the South. They were basically far western Texas Confederates for everything. And in it, you can see that there's a very slight bit of animosity between John Wayne's character, who fought in the war, and those who stayed behind, and kind of a religious conscientious objector, sort of. My grandfather actually had me look through it. And when he came in, the only way that he could have ever had any money, which is something that comes up throughout the entire situation, is it's like running into old spies and everything. He actually had to be working for the Union because he had over 160 Yankee dollars, as he called it. He's constantly always mentioning something very poignantly or something else. And then he breaks down into the old normal John Wayne just to say something that's off by a word or off by something that you wouldn't really say. Even in the movie, it does come up. And in the movie, it's also one of the best cases for weaponized racism. Throughout the movie, it starts off that there's this one native tribe that goes and raids the area. There's this other native tribe that goes and raids the area. Then it's this other native tribe, and they keep searching over a course of 5 years for his youngest niece, who was carried off in the raid. He takes his adopted nephew, and he takes one other person with him. One of them dies chasing them. It comes up that he's back and forth across everywhere. There's certain things that come up throughout it that if you knew a lot of the Civil War history from it, and it's a very in-depth historical movie, that if you ever heard about the roundabout, the place where everybody would meet at the roundabout, is really what's been come up later, found out in code between the Holy Roman Empire's invasion into Mexico at the same time, was to meet up in the Gulf of Mexico, because the current just makes the roundabout and you follow the current to trade winds back home. For you to be in some of these specialized, kind of like militia or private security groups, you did have to be able to kind of fake that you were Native American. It's why they would have red associated with them. Red bars, red sleeves, red legs. And these would be something that you were supposed to be able to do. Survive off the land, live like Native Americans, since it was such a conglomerate situation over different tribes, different artifacts left behind, different things such as that, and even wrong burials and things over the natives. You can make a case that even at the very end, when he mentions the word Comanche, instead of saying Comanche, this is something else that's also came up where possibly it was a taught situation. And this is still, I think, an open case going back through. Is it a renegade group of Texas Rangers that they didn't want to have found out by the Union Army? Is it a group of Confederates that were told that the roundabout was basically in the lawless zone between Chihuahua and the Texas border over to what is still kind of known a little bit wild, Tijuana and a couple of those towns just over in New Mexico. And you can ride back and forth and always just kind of do a roundabout. Pancho Villa stayed there, holding out for the Holy Roman Empire. But why would he keep going back and forth across the border unless there was something there for him? The drug lord, Scaramanda, or Scaramanda, these words come up over and over in that area for a continual holdout group. Also, there's just as much evidence, since so much Native American artifacts, tool working, and specifically trained situations came up, that it was a new group that had splintered off from all the others and were trying to make themselves into what the Seminole did, mostly leaving from the Creek Nation and remaking themselves in their own tribe with new rituals, customs, and things such as that would then blend together. This is one of the things that looks up and keeps this movie keep going. It is a very interesting situation and has things that do come up even in the 80s, I mean the 1980s and 1990s, with people who are supposedly just as bad as Pablo Escobar, Manuel Noriega. With this situation and the fact that he had had a major scar to his face and disfigured him, it's similar to the legend of the one they call Loveless, which has another name for another general that was in Texas. And they wonder if somehow these were not highly trained, advanced shock troops that they were going to be bringing out that could use any type of Native American culture and leave enough behind. This is even something that has came up in World War II over everything with the double agent program of Operation Red Cloud. There were actual troops that were trained this in a certain area that came ashore in order to complete this type of mission and leave behind so much evidence over it. And they did target the desert Southwest in this area up the Gulf of California. This is one of the reasons why I think this movie has stayed around for so long. And it shows a lot of the differences in culture, even if you're slightly removed from the area or from the culture, that you're really not all the way in there on it. And it's very different throughout it. The movie is an excellent movie. In my own personal opinion, I'd give it an 8, just because my grandfather had me go through so much over it to try and look about how, if things aren't completely dealt with, how it can spin off on different areas in legal situations, and how to try and look where they worked in certain things that would even keep it going on everything in the kind of like espionage situation, and how people can be obsessed with it. He actually didn't want me to watch the movie and wanted me to look at it more from a criminal, military to civilian rights investigation. And then also my other side of the family, who had to deal with so much of World War I and World War II with people being missing and gone, told me never to ever watch it because you will, in a way, go, there's someone that's still out there. And if there is something in that you have a situation over that, I would not recommend this movie for you. It goes on through some of the scenes that I will say. The one that's always biggest for me is the one where John Wayne kind of loses it. And he's always coming to odds, and John Wayne's got to punch somebody in the face. So it's his partner that's his adopted nephew. And he's always keeping the drinks from him and saying, why don't you grow up? You're not old enough yet still. And anyway, they're waist deep in snow, everything else. And he's just totally lost it. And he's emptying his whole rifle into the herd of buffalo, even though they're starving. And he's like, and he punches his nephew in the face and he says, that's all the empty bellies that they'll have because they left them all empty. And it's about the third year that they've been searching, still hearing about stuff and having pieces of clothing from her dress that they have to buy for like 4 or 5 gold pieces out there just to confirm that it's hers. And he empties all of his rounds into it. And it's a very powerful scene. There's not the great emotion that you would think of someone at the end of it falling to their knees like you'd have nowadays in something. And then the military comes along. And then there's the complete change of everything as they go over to a native camp that's been raided, and they find someone that was close to them that they had traded with and everything else there that was dead. And it's just in the course of like a minute and a half, the extreme rage and everything else at the end of whatever it is that's kind of working PTSD over a situation, then over to a nice, wonderful person who would be trying to help them or anything. With this, I have to say, I really did like it, and I can see why they told me to wait until I was older to watch the movie, even though I think it's only PG-13 or television 14, simply because it deals with so much in it. This is Colin Dawson. Like and subscribe. I give the Searchers, again, an 8 out of 10. Simply because they could have put so much more detail into it, and it feels a little jerky. But if you're familiar with certain types of cases and searching for people over that, you will actually understand.